Welcome to EdLeader with your host, Dr. Rob Jackson. Join Dr. Jackson for conversations and reflections on improving educational leadership from the classroom to the boardroom and beyond. Educational leadership is an ever-evolving opportunity to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of students, parents, and the community. And now, here's your host, Dr. Rob Jackson.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the EdLeader podcast. I'm your host, Rob Jackson, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. This week, the podcast was featured in an article on 10 trending podcasts for district leaders and educators. If the podcast is trending, I know that it's because of the amazing ed leaders who share their expertise, their experience, and their passion with each of us. My goal with this podcast is to add value to your work while highlighting and amplifying the work of heroes. I'm grateful for them and grateful for you. Speaking of grateful, I cannot wait to introduce today's guest to you. Her work and message speaks directly into my professional and personal life. Let's get to it. Today's guest has been serving in educational leadership in Northwest Wisconsin since 2004, first as an English teacher and then as a building principal at all building levels. She is passionate about leadership and developing educators into the best version of themselves to lead at home, work, and life. She seeks this balance in her own life by pursuing passions such as running and writing, focusing on her family with her husband who is a teacher and coach and their 2 young daughters, while also honing her leadership skills through networking, teaching, and learning. To seek balance in her own life, she's maintained a daily running streak since July 11, 2014. She believes that leadership is a calling, and she's proud to answer that call every day. As a classroom teacher, she was twice designated as the most influential teacher. In 2015, her leadership was recognized as the building she led was designated as a Title I School of Recognition. She's the co-author of the book, Balance Like a Pirate, Going Beyond the Work-Life Balance to Ignite Passion and Thrive as an Educator, and contributed to Peter DeWitt's Collaborative Leadership, 6 Influences That Matter Most, and Adam Welcome's Run Like a Pirate. She's a state and national conference speaker around topics of balance, resilience, and faith. She's passionate about amplifying and empowering women through the In All podcast, which she hosts through In All LLC, a business she founded to amplify and empower women. As an educational consultant, she holds an unwavering belief in the importance of the message she shares with participants and readers of her leadership books about seeking balance, building resiliency, and transforming within their own lives to be the best leaders they can be at home, work, and life. Please help me welcome one of my newest sheroes, Mrs. Sarah Johnson. Sarah Johnson, I am so excited to have this opportunity to spend time with you. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and your passion with the listeners and with me here on the EdLeader podcast.
Dr. Rob, it's such a joy to be with you. I'm so grateful that we get to have this space together and that I get to just have a great conversation with you. Thank you for asking.
You host the In All podcast, and I am in awe of you and your work. I encountered you, of course, online through social media and have found in some ways a kindred spirit, and I'm just excited about the opportunity to spend time with you.
Me too. And I think a kindred spirit piece, I think we're just uncovering that. But one of the things I saw is that you're a runner, and we didn't even talk about that at all at any point. So I don't know if we'll touch it here, but at some point, I think we should.
Well, absolutely. And I do think that we should chat about that for a moment because it is a passion of mine, and it's probably a stretch to call me a runner. I run a lot. I love running from the standpoint of it's an opportunity to really spend time reflecting on everything else that's going on, but taking care of myself so that I'm ready to take care of others. Tell me about running for you. How is it that you got into running? And by the way, congratulations on this daily running streak. I am in awe of that. Tell our listeners about this daily running streak and then how you got into running.
Okay. I running is the same for me as you shared. And I know in your roles, it's probably served you really well for quite a long time. For me, today is day 2,406 of that running streak. And
Wow.
it's kind of, yeah, I know it's, when I say it out loud, it sounds weird because I don't often talk about it. It's just something I do. But it started on July 11th of 2014, and it really is tied to my resilience story. And I know that's something we want to speak about. I'm not a runner prior to this starting, Dr. Rob. I actually probably had some snobbiness about me and thinking that, well, I could never do it. I wouldn't identify myself that way. And I had a superintendent and a principal colleague that would sit before our meetings and talk about their run. And inside, I was just thinking, who has time for that? Which is really neat because I didn't run one day working in that particular learning community. I actually ended up starting my streak as I was transitioning from one to the other. So, but now looking back all these years later, it's been almost 7 years. It's the thing that kept me able to continue my own resilience story and to make space for myself. You mentioned self-care. It's more than physical activity for me. It's spiritual care. It's really the avenue that got me back to center because I had lost myself in what I always call now the idol of a title. I knew Principal Johnson really well. I had lost track of who Sarah was. And so running for me really is the space that I get to clear the rest of the world out and just get back into my own head.
I love the way you said that because I find the same exact thing in that when we are so very passionate about the work we do, and we should be, when we are very centered on our why, as Simon Sinek would talk about the golden circle, sometimes we can lose ourselves in that and lose our priorities. Certainly for me, my family is a great priority, but I've sacrificed time with my family. And as my children are now out of the home and very successful young adults, I worry about that in a way they don't seem to, but I regret the moments I lost with them. And when I'm out running, it gives me the opportunity to really just think about things beyond the urgency of the task at hand in my work. And so it is a place for me to recenter myself. And so I certainly feel that same way when I'm out running. In terms of your daily running streak, I'm really fascinated by that, just as someone who loves to run. What do you have to do on a daily basis to say to yourself, I have continued the streak? Is there a metric that you have for that? Or is it just I went outside and I ran down the sidewalk?
I love that question. And I've been asked this a few times over the years, and it's kind of shifted. And I think it's a beautiful story for listeners to consider because I think when I started this running streak, I will be very honest with you, I was not in the healthy version of myself. What I know about myself now through something called the Enneagram, is I'm an Enneagram 7, and in our unhealthy, we go to what's called a 1. And if anybody wants a backstory on that, please contact me. I'll share more, but it's more of an obsessive compulsive situation that I had going on. So to start the streak, it was, I had to end at exactly 2 miles or whatever that was at the time. I had this internal, I have to make it this far, I have to go this long, or I have to run this fast, right? All of these things that were building up inside of me to really perpetuate this unhealthy need for control, if that makes sense.
It does.
And so, yeah, it's shifted over time. For the first several months, I didn't even keep track on a running app. It was more so just getting out every day and pressing myself. I had never run a mile before then, but it's been at least a mile per day, really, for the most of it, except when about a year ago, oh my goodness, it's almost 2 years ago now, I'd injured myself. And so then I was thinking, well, now I got to run a half a mile, but I shouldn't even be walking on this stupid foot. So it's changed, and I've allowed myself to be adaptable to that over time. But dominantly, it has been at least 1 mile. Sometimes it's been 26 miles in a day. But I always keep another streak, which is 100 miles per month. And I've done that for almost as long as this daily streak. So if that helps listeners to kind of understand, it's generally 3 to 3.5 miles per day, but it fluctuates depending on what I'm doing with my running.
Well, and I love that. And I appreciate you talking about the obsessive compulsive piece for myself. And I don't have the long streak. And primarily, unfortunately, I think my calendar gets in the way, but it's because I allow my calendar to get in the way. But similarly,
I use an app to track my running and certainly appreciate that. But then the obsessive compulsive part of me is that I have a Google Doc that started off as an Excel sheet that actually goes back to 2012 when I started to run, and have tracked the number of miles that I've ran every day that I've ran. And I compare that by week, by month, and by year for nobody's purpose but my own. And perhaps it's because I'm also a bit obsessive compulsive. But for me, I use that to say it's almost that set the goal. I want to do better than I did last January, or to really track it. And it's somewhat silly when I think about it or talk about it out loud that I've spent that much time tracking data, but data is our world as professionals. And so perhaps there's something to that as well.
I am just beaming over here because I love that you keep track that way. And, I think there is, just like with anything, there can be a shadow side to some of our behaviors. And for me, I think healthy coping is my running. I have way other unhealthy ways of coping with my stress. I'll tell you that right now. So I don't want to paint the picture that this obsessive compulsive is bad. And I love that you keep track because for me, it shows about your personality that you're into growing and that you want to see those growth results. And I think that's important for any of us that are looking to develop into this ultimate vision of who we want to become. So to me, that's inspiring because I'm really bad at the details of that kind of thing. But for me too, I want to share that, for me, the running started out that way. But honestly, I've shared this in the way that when you look at running as like a metaphor for a journey of self-discovery, for me, I knew I was running away from things I didn't want to face. And so it was better for me to focus on the other stuff until it was time where I just couldn't look away anymore because you're inside your head in a more healthy way when you're out running. And so my streak ended up morphing to this beautiful resilience story where I needed it. I felt like I needed it. And I was running away until I started running through. And then I started running toward. And I'm still kind of in that space right now where I'm still running toward this healthy version of the person that has self-awareness and that can see when I start to get into destructive behaviors, how to mitigate those things and just allow myself to be fluid as a real whole person. And so for me, I haven't even shared this yet, but one of the major things that I do every year is I set goals for the entire year. And I'm supposed to release my streak this year. And that's going to be really hard for me, Dr. Rob. Because it's a spiritually driven directive, right? And I have the plan for that now. I've been processing it for the last month. And I've made the decision that, whatever I choose to do that's in kind of some obedience for my spiritual world, it will always end up being for me. So even though I'm not going to have this, running streak, I'm going to still have a streak because I know I need to keep track of my mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And so very likely I'll end up finally doing the things that all the really smart people do, which is, cross training and working on strength and flexibility on running. So
I love that. And I tell you, there's so much there that just really just struck me in terms of thinking about this plan for the streak coming to the end. And my immediate thought is, oh no, I hope you have lots of friends around you. And you've got this real thought about the support through that moment, particularly when you've invested so much time. But I want to back up a little bit because I felt your words washing over me. So I know from your background that you were an English teacher, and clearly words are something that you love and you use them so well. And you described running away from something, then running through something, and then running towards something. And as you said that just hit me in a very powerful way. And I know that that's something that probably while I'm running, I'm going to really be working through just that metaphor and how probably in various times in our life, both personally and professionally, we're doing those three things. We're running away from something, we're running through something, or running towards something. And maybe we're doing all three of those things at any one time at the same time. But that's such a powerful word picture. And maybe that needs to be the thesis of your next book. And we'll look for that. But I just love the way you put that together, running away, running through, and running toward.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really been my life's work probably for the last 3 years is just really uncovering what that means. And now where I know you hadn't asked this yet, but for me, this time, this daily commitment to become better for me means that I am now in a space where, as a leader, I feel like I can help others take that same journey in an authentic way where prior to all of that on, struggle and away and through and everything, I don't know that I would have had the self-awareness to be able to help guide people the way that I'm able to now. So I think it's like using our lessons and our life experiences and our failures and our stumbles to be able to serve greater and serve well through those.
See, I love that. I feel a compulsion, a professional obligation to pay it forward in and within our profession. So as educators, we do this really hard work, and the work we do is sometimes loved and celebrated by the greater community, and sometimes not so much, but simply to say that with this really tough work, anytime I have the opportunity to share the lessons that I've learned in a way that might be helpful to someone else, or to recognize and honor those whose shoulders I stand upon, who spoke into my life, who shared from their expertise and experience. It's just something that's absolutely beautiful. And so this podcast is really about that, sitting down with amazing educators like yourself, amazing ed leaders, and just having these great conversations. And so really kind of moving forward in that conversation, I do want to talk to you about your work in terms of, maybe we start with the podcast, or I'll let you kind of guide that part of the conversation, this In All podcast, where you're really working to amplify voices and amplify opportunities. Share with our listeners the work and maybe the focus that you're currently involved in and clearly very passionate about.
Well, I want to thank you for your model, by the way, Dr. Rob, and for not only this podcast, but for all of the things that you do that are not seen. And, a huge piece of the podcast stems from that help others be seen. And so we're very kindred in that way too. But when I had left my principalship in 2018, which is a whole story in itself, I really just had kind of ripped the title off. And then I was wandering through the wilderness, like, what's next? And I knew I was going to take this big leap, but I didn't know what was supposed to happen next. And it was in the silence of, and honestly, wretched silence when everyone else went back to school. And I'm like, who am I now if I'm not doing this? Came to me to say, I need to use my gifts. And part of that is being able to have conversations, authentic conversations, but more so creating a platform that I hadn't seen available in that time. I'm going into a third year in this podcast. I've completed 2 full, but I just hadn't seen space for women, for their stories to be amplified. And I think that's shifted over the last couple of years. But when I started the podcast, it really was because I saw a need and I had a desire to really just hear people's stories and to share them, because I think there's a mission in all of our messages. And that's really what it came from. So I do amplify women on the podcast. And what I always love, I have to tell you this, is knowing that we can go into a conversation and any particular guest can say, well, I don't have anything to share. Nobody cares about my story. But then to hear a year later where they're saying that was the linchpin for me to start speaking more or to share myself. And to me, that's the best outcome. So it's really just about sharing people's journeys and honoring the narrative of our lives.
Absolutely. I do respect and honor that. And I want to amplify that as much as I possibly can, particularly because we work in a profession. I started off as an educator. Well, I started off as a school secretary while going to school to be a teacher, but I started off as an elementary teacher. And as an elementary teacher, I was the only male in the building, and that's a whole other story. But I work in a profession with more women than men. And at least early on in my career, very few women who were in leadership positions, at least in my experience. And so having the opportunity to do something about that through amplifying stories or through connecting women in leadership with women who aspire to be in leadership so that they can hear from each other and share their journeys and learn from each other's expertise and experience in a real and authentic way just becomes so important to me. And I'm so excited about my discovering the In All podcast. And for our listeners, I'll link in our show notes the various things that Sarah and I have talked about. So you'll be able to find them very quickly, including her website and links to her work. I just appreciate you really taking the time to amplify the stories. And I've loved listening to the stories. There have been times, and we've talked about very briefly, one of your recent podcasts where a guest shared something a teacher said that wasn't the teacher at the teacher's best moment. And it just hit me in the heart. And then to hear that story of resilience that your guest went on to talk about was just so very powerful. So I do appreciate that work, Sarah. And I'm so glad you're doing that work and giving opportunities for others to find their voice, because just as you've said, I've seen where once someone sees the power of sharing their story, they begin to share their story, and we're all better off for it.
Yes, thank you for that, for catching the podcast and for sharing that feedback too, because I think you know this maybe more than the listeners would, is you work pretty hard to get these podcast episodes out. So anytime you hear that back, it's almost like in the classroom when you've educated and you're working hard with the kids, but you don't hear till maybe 5-6 years later that something stuck with them, or maybe you never do. And you just keep doing the work faithfully, believing that there's a purpose in it. And so that's such an honor for you to speak back that specific detail. And so thank you for doing that. And thank you for your work. You're doing the same way.
Absolutely. And I just appreciate you. Well, let's kind of continue to kind of grow the conversation in new areas. So first of all, kind of going back to where we started, then we started talking about running, and I got sidetracked and loved that part of our conversation. As an English teacher, I'm just guessing that you had to be so excited when at this year's inauguration, and again, don't want to really dig into politics at all, but at this year's inauguration, that poetry was front and center. And then the poet had the opportunity to share a poem at the start of the Super Bowl. I just am guessing that as an English teacher, that just thrilled you to no end.
It really did. One of my big sheroes in this life is Dr. Maya Angelou, and I remember her delivering a poem at inauguration as well. So as I was sitting there watching that event with my children, because we're at home, they're doing online learning and I'm working from home, and we sat here in the very office that I'm speaking to you in, and watching their reaction to that also was so powerful. So yes, as an English teacher, as an educator in general, as a mom, watching the beauty of that talent and that excellence unfold and be put on display is huge. And yeah, the poetry piece of it, I think it's so awesome to see how powerful poetry can be as a medium. And we never give it enough credit. Kids never gave it credit in the classroom. And you're right. And thank you for bringing that up, because when I think back to one of the things that I did that was a little more innovative in the classroom was getting kids to not only get to poetry slams, but participate in them and engage with them, and watching kids, their passion just light up. And you never know where it can lead you. So absolutely. I love that.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And I'll tell you that, and unfortunately, I had to watch the replay because we were in the middle of whatever we were in the middle of at work that day. But I was taken by that opportunity that was given to a young lady. And then to see that celebrated in a real and meaningful way, it just meant a lot to me as an educator, because certainly as an educator, I want to believe, and I do believe, that every child can be president. And I want to believe, and I do believe in the American dream. And so anything that we can do to celebrate and highlight those opportunities of achievement and to help those come about becomes extremely important. And so I absolutely loved listening to her deliver her poem, and then going back and actually reading the words and just seeing how powerful it was absolutely awesome. And even in the poem, she talked about resilience in her life, and resilience, and specifically speaking to the country, the resilience that she sees in our country. I know that resilience is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about and sharing about and really growing and understanding about. Share with our listeners, and I think I shared with you, resilience is my word, so maybe I'm being a bit selfish in this moment asking this question. But share with our listeners, what does resilience mean to you, and how do you operationalize that in your personal and professional life?
Oh, I don't think it's selfish at all. I think resilience is a perfect word for now. And honestly, it's one of those things that as an ed leader, a lot of times when the way I always say it is we're raised up in a particular way. Like as educators, we were taught certain pedagogical strategies. And as leaders, I think there's either a direct or an underlying message that failure is not okay, that we can't be fallible, and that the human nature of who we are just has to be put aside when we put on that cape of leadership. And for me, I know everybody has their own stories, but for me, resilience is not just a one-time event. It is a constant practice. And where, I used to maybe think I'd have to trip and fall into this massive pit and follow these steps. I know that resilience just has to happen every day. And I also think that when I think about now and coming out of 2020 and into what 2021 looks like, we're going to need to keep doing that. We can't just think that we're going to rise up from the pandemic as a one-time event, but instead it's going to have to be, I would use the term micro resilience, which is a term I got from an author, Bonnie St. John and Alan Haynes, where micro resilience is minor shifts for major boosts in focus, drive, and energy. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're going to need to do mindfully for the long haul in terms of operationalizing. So I don't know if I gave you a good, solid, straightforward, but to me, I think it comes in different forms. When we rise up and we're able to do that from major failure, or that we know that we're just going to keep getting hit. I love the analogy, and I use this in my book, Lead with Faith, about slaying giants, fear giants, the challenge that we have in front of us all the time. And just knowing that once you get up out of that pit, there's more on the field.
Exactly.
And so just having that mindful ability to know that this isn't always happening to you, it's happening for you, but being capable of seeing your own power to continue to fight through the stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you can almost be paralyzed by the thought that this is the giant we're currently fighting, but there's another giant waiting and another giant waiting beyond that. And it almost becomes that piece of, back to your running analogy, we can run away from it, we can run through it, or we can run toward it. And when we're very focused on our why and truly understand that we're here to try to make a difference for children and staff members as ed leaders and for our community, it helps keep pushing through so that we continue to run through and run toward, knowing that it's worth the effort and that our children are worth and worthy of all that we have to give them in the moment. And so I just appreciate that. And I agree with you. Resilience is something that I continue to grow in my understanding of, and will continue to grow in my understanding of, and will continue to focus on from the standpoint of, I need to be new and different with each new challenge. And that new and different comes from the strategies and the strength that I've gained from the last challenge. And perhaps that's the whole aha to the journey, that what I'm dealing with now is preparing me for what comes next.
That's so good. Yes. Two things before we head off of this topic, because you did ask me about how I operationalize that. And I suppose for me, there's so many different resources that you can use now. It's like everywhere. Self-care obviously is one of them. But when I think about operationalizing it into a framework, Brené Brown's work on this was transforming for me at the time when I needed it. And at the time I was reading Rising Strong, and now she's put a lot of those things into the book Dare to Lead. But she has this process that I think we can't ignore, which is reckoning with our emotions and being able to notice them. And I think one of the challenges for leaders right now is just stuffing it all down because you don't know what else to do. Like, you can't recognize that maybe your reaction to something right now is just a stem from an emotion you haven't stated or dealt with, right?
Right.
So you reckon with your emotions, you rumble with the stories. And when I'm coaching ed leaders right now, they're telling themselves stories about either their failures or the giants in front of them, the challenges, the perceptions, of educators right now in our current climate. And just really spending time rumbling. Is this true? Is this real? Is this something Brené calls them confabulations. Am I making something up? What story I'm telling myself is, right? And then finally, revolutionizing your attitude. That is a cycle for me of some of the strongest pieces that we can do to become more resilient. But we can't go into it blind, and we can't keep saying, I got this, because we don't got this. We're humans that need to acknowledge the challenges that we're in. And I just think if leaders aren't ready to do that, they're not going to rise up from the challenge.
I think you're exactly right. And I tell you, Sarah, I'm just sitting here thinking, I want to schedule daily coffee with you and just continue to have this conversation, because I feel like I could just spend days and days just really diving in and thinking through and thinking with you. And I'm very grateful that I have that opportunity to do that through the books you've written, through the podcast, through your website. And so I want to encourage you in this moment and all that you're doing. It, I'm sure, took incredible courage to step away from the work you were doing and to step into the work you're currently doing. And as you continue to step forward toward whatever may lie ahead for you, I just want to encourage you and thank you for taking the time to amplify the work of others and to share from your experience and your expertise. I've loved our time together. Thank you for this incredible gift of time for myself and for our listeners. Sarah Johnson, you're a rock star.
Thank you, Dr. Rob.
I hope that you enjoyed our time today with Mrs. Sarah Johnson. Whether you are running from, running through, or running toward the next challenge, don't forget to seek balance in your life and prioritize taking care of yourself, even as you continue to take care of others. Show notes for today's episode and each episode in the EdLeader podcast series are available at drrobjackson.com. Thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you for all that you do for every student, every teacher, and every staff member. You are making a difference. If no one else has told you, I want you to know that I believe in you. Good day.
Thank you for listening to the EdLeader podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving a review with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts so that we may continue to grow the EdLeader community. We hope that you have enjoyed your time with Dr. Jackson. Until next time.